Today we have on Mike Malpass. He has been a police officer for almost 30 years, where he spent time in patrol, SWAT, and as an instructor in the academy. Mike is currently working for Phoenix PD, where he is assigned to the police academy, designing and teaching defensive tactics programs based on neuroscience. Mike is also running a neuroscience study with Dr. Leslie Sherlin on the effects of brain training on peak performance. In 2019, Mike published his book, Taming the Serpent: How Neuroscience Can Revolutionize Modern Law Enforcement Training. Mike's book explores how neuroscience can help us understand the difference between how the brain works in normal and high stress situations and how this affects law enforcement officers. With this understanding, Mike believes training can be adjusted to increase the ability to make critical decisions in the compressed timeframes of law enforcement encounters. Mike, thanks for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it. I know that we've been excited to have some sciencey backgrounds on the show, so we're very pumped to talk to you. And I guess my first question for you is, at what point during your lengthy career did you start thinking about the neuroscience aspect of law enforcement and decision making, and whether it be that force escalation under stress? When did that come into the picture for you? Because I imagine that wasn't like a day one thing for you.
No, it wasn't a day one. Before I was a police officer, I was a fighter. So I fought competitively, boxing, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, done a little bit of all of it. But the hardest part always has been fighters are a little crazy, and they're always trying to figure out how do you handle that emotional load building up to the event. And then there's that idea, once the bell rings, it's like, holy cow, thank you. Now we can just get to work. And then you get to law enforcement and you realize that what's a big deal to some people is not a big deal to you. But then there are things that are happening where you're like, holy cow, I've never seen anything like this before. So how do you learn that balance when all of a sudden 99% of your job is pretty easy, but that 1% can get real difficult real quick, and it can get overwhelming if you're not used to it. So the idea that when you have the fight background, it kind of helps with the emotional part. You understand you've been there, have had pieces of the puzzle. And then the first time it changes, it changes a lot, is the first time someone tries to kill you. And then you realize that sport is sport and real life is a hell of a lot different than sport. So it's always been in my mind. I've always been interested in medicine. I've always been interested in fighting, but most of the time, the whole idea behind fighting was I knew I wanted to be a police officer. But I also knew that I didn't want to come to the job not prepared. So I wanted to do everything I could to prepare for it. And then once I got on the job and started seeing some of the training and realizing that we were probably missing the mark a little bit in preparing people for the vicissitudes of combat.
Absolutely. Did you ever do any sports psychology when you were a fighter?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of it. And it's interesting because some of it comes from like the Vietnam veterans who were the original. A lot of my coaches were all Vietnam veterans. So a lot of it came from how they learned to deal with what they were seeing. And then from the other coaches were also police officers. So now they're kind of steering you in that direction. So they would give you the right books to read, the right people to talk to. And I was in sports physiology in college. So I had access to Dr. Frederick Hagerman and some other great people there who would help me out, although they didn't like the idea I was getting hit in the head so much. But, there's always that trade-off.
Yeah, I come from a martial arts background too. And I remember having a conversation, I think I've mentioned it on a previous podcast, with an officer, just talking about stress inoculation and how to train for it, and how I really can't find a better situation than a competition to get that adrenaline and all of those emotions to the point where you have to deal with them and then get into the fight or get into, maybe a competition or whatever it is that you're doing. There really isn't anything you can, jack your heart rate up as far as you can, and it won't stimulate the same things that nerves do as you're, walking into that competition or getting ready to spar against someone that bothers you, that makes you nervous.
Exactly. And the hard part is then finding that comfort zone. So if you spend 80% of your time in the competition setting, whether it's with handgun, rifle, or with your martial arts, you still have to spend a good 20% of the time putting it in context so that you're not misinterpreting the sportive world in the realistic environment. So that's the other hard part about making that switch from sport to the job is finding that context and who can help you take that sportive context and switch it so that you're applying it correctly to the job you have to do.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between emotional response and cognitive response for law enforcement officers?
Absolutely. So there is there is the way it's usually presented, and I chose that way when I wrote the book. And Daniel Kahneman did too in a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And a lot of people misinterpret the idea that there is a cognitive system and that there's an emotional system. So the brain is not reactive. Someone doesn't make you mad. You don't get mad or upset because of a situation. Your brain predicts it. So your brain is a predictive machine. So in the easier explanation of two systems, like a cognitive system and an emotional system, it really is, it's more a prediction by your brain based on your past experiences, your genes, what genes are expressed and on, your experiences, what mood you're in at that time. Everything inside of your body is compared to what's happening outside of your body. And then the brain floats a prediction. The more time you have to let that prediction develop, the more accurate it's going to be. The idea of being more driven by the limbic system, what some people would call the emotional system, would be those quick, fast heuristics that are used. They're fast, but they're not necessarily accurate. And if you're not careful and respond based on those quicker heuristics, you can end up making a mistake. So that's kind of, there is that idea. An emotion is basically your affect, what's happening inside of your body taken to an extreme. In most cases, your brain is trying to interpret every feeling going on in your body, and you don't notice all of it as an emotion. A lot of it you just notice as affect. I'm uncomfortable, I'm unsettled, I'm happy, I'm content. When it gets to an extreme, that's where you feel something like fear or ecstatic or what you would call more emotion. The idea is that if you are not training so that your brain is predicting you being calm and under control, then you're going to have to take steps to mitigate an extreme emotional response. And that's going to take more time. And while you are trying to mitigate that response, a lot of things are happening that you may not be aware of. That's where a lot of our mistakes can come in when we're under high loads of stress. We don't know how to deal with it. And we're in what you would call either a fear freak out or a brain lock. And there is a science behind what the brain lock is and how it develops in your system.
So how would you say, when I read your book, what I was interpreting is that there's, obviously when we have time to think, we have time to go through those cognitive steps, predict more what's going to happen. And when things are happening fast, if you're not, like you said, training for that cognitive response, you're going to kind of revert to the emotional response. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just sort of interpreting how I read it, but how would you say, especially for new officers, how would you train to get to that cognitive space so that you can react thinking and not emotionally?
So again, the idea is like what you would call cognitive. The brain is more like layered. So information, people make the mistake of thinking that the eyes actually see, that the ears actually hear, that the nose actually smells. All of those are interpretations by the brain. Light goes in through the retina, it goes back to the visual cortex of the brain, and the brain starts making ideas, puts it together, shapes, colors, and it starts to give predictions. And what it's looking for is this good enough to create your reality that's in front of you? A lot of people, especially people who watch like a law enforcement or use of force that they see on the media, are assuming that your eyes work like cameras and that you see everything in front of you. Your brain does see everything that when light's reflected, it's seeing everything, but you're only focused on and you're only paying attention to the things that are driven by your goals at the moment. So picture yourself driving down the road and you are in a hurry to get to work, your focus is on the road, you're taking in what's happening on the side of the road. But as long as there's not a violation of your expectations, your attention won't be diverted there. If all of a sudden you sense sudden movement and now see a child running from between two cars, that's a violation of your expectations. And now you're going to get that little jolt. And that jolt usually appears in the body first as fear. All sudden surprise, whether it ends up being happy or fearful, is always going to start as that little fear jolt where you're like, well, oh my God. And then a response has to happen. That's the idea. So each layer of the brain, as you move forward toward cognitive processing, gets more developed, and it becomes more accurate. So what you're really looking for is time. It's not really a switching of the systems, it's a layering. As each layer gets a hold of it, it becomes more and more accurate, and your responses are going to be more and more controlled the further along you bring it. And there's also fear responses that happen and you don't have a choice in the matter. They bypass all conscious thinking. So if you've ever been hiking on a path, especially here in Arizona in the summertime, you sense sudden movement, you're going to move because rattlesnakes are abundant out here, and that's going to get you moving. You're not thinking about that. There's no cognition involved in that. That's totally bypassing that layer. That's the first layer, just going boom, move. Now you're going to have a sudden choice to make, and the choices can be, I do nothing and get bit. I do something and move out of the way, make kind of a Michael Jackson noise, and then look and find out it's a bunny rabbit instead of a rattlesnake. You can turn and find out it's the wind, a rustle in the leaves. It wasn't what you thought it was. But originally, the brain's always going to want to protect the mechanism that is you. It's not the conscious you. We got to protect the mechanism. That's a bypass mechanism, and we have those. And for law enforcement, that's the dangerous one. When you have a gun in your hand and sudden surprise, you can get a very sudden reaction and then not think about it. And the amazing thing about the brain is the brain is then going to try to tell you a story to justify why you did it.
So what was the term you used? A violation of your expectation. I was going to say prediction, but expectation. That's so fascinating. I love that phrasing because it really does paint a picture. And in my interpretation, I think you can interpret it in several different contexts, that violation of expectation, whether it be bias or what have you. But in my mind, I'm thinking in terms of performing scenarios or reps in your head, or much like Lexi and I have done, is imagining all the alternatives to the scenario you're encountering, so that in the future, if you do encounter that alternative scenario, you've at least done a few mental reps, so that response, that cognitive response, you might have that jolt, but you've already thought through it once before, so it's you have that footprint in your brain, and it's like you're able to work your way through that problem. And so I feel like that, if I'm making any sense at all, I feel like that's something that can be accumulated through training a broad scope of scenarios, or at least letting, kind of like they teach you in the academy, letting your mind wander and allowing yourself to create scenarios that, whether they be unlikely, at least you've been there mentally. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That, in fact, so the idea is in training, the number one thing that can get all of us in trouble, and I've taught all over the world, and I've brought in people from special operations, military, SWAT guys, from my own team and teams all over the world. And here's what I have found. If I can surprise you in the time it takes from surprise to recovery from surprise, is the most dangerous time for anyone. I don't care how good you are. When you are really good at what you do, the time from surprise to what I'm going to do about it is shortened. When you are not good at what you do, the time from surprise to what you're going to do about it is very long. So that is the point of the training. And you said a great word for it. So, and here's one where it really, the term has lost its meaning. Your brain, your subconscious brain, is an implicit bias system. Every brain is. It's gotten misused so much to believe that only some people have it. Your brain, your subconscious brain, is an implicit bias system. Implicit, subconscious, bias, hunches about risk and reward. That's what your brain does all day. It's hunches about risk and reward. What are my goals? Is this driving me towards them or further away from them? In the context of what I'm doing, my brain may tell me to move one way, but the active shooter tells me I have to go the other way. So there's all of these things going on, and it's all driven by goals. But your implicit bias, everybody has it. And this idea of how it was used, even the person who came up with the implicit bias test has now written about it and said, holy cow, people are misusing this term. It's fast, not necessarily accurate, and it happens quick. But yes, if someone doesn't look like you, act like you, talk like you, walk like you, believe like you, your initial impression is don't trust, because the brain doesn't know. The brain categorizes, it divides people into us's, it divides them into them, and it does it all day long. Some people are more driven as an us by politics, some by religion, some people by race, some people go on and on and on. Some people by what team they worship, as opposed to, some people by job. There's all of these different categories, and everybody has a hierarchy of which ones are the most important. So training is that idea of understanding how you're going to be driven by these biases, but also how to drive your training so that you're predicting the correct things. And number one is predicting not losing your shit under extreme stress. And the only way to do that is to put yourself in situations where you are gradually, as you're building your skill sets and integrating your skill sets, putting yourself into positions where you're going to feel some of that stress, and then learning how to predict that you're going to mitigate that, so that you understand, I've been here, I've done that. I have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. And if someone's going to do this, it might as well be me. Someone needs to do it, and here I am. That's kind of how you're trying to develop that idea through training.
Lexi's ears just perked up when you
said,
yeah.
You are keying in on so many things that I've thought a lot about, and that's actually how I found your book. Is somebody wrote an article about implicit bias training, and then referred to your book as sort of a, I don't know, alternative, but expanding on implicit bias as in law enforcement training. But one thing that you said, when we went through our implicit bias training, and then I also went through a training that referenced the Left Up Bang book that you quote in your book, and is another book that I just love so much, is that it's so important for law enforcement officers to establish that baseline. So like you said, if you're in a community with people that maybe don't look like you, or you didn't grow up with, like, what is the baseline that should, give you an idea of what those expectations should be, and I saw that a lot in your book, and I thought that was really good. You said something about getting back to the beat cop mentality.
Yes.
And we talked before we started recording about my nerd notes. I wrote yes and circled it 8 times. But you said the beat cop mentality says, I am responsible for this beat and what happens in it, and it is my job to let them know it. Beat cops get out of their cars and they talk to people. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of that, and how it relates back to that expectation bias and all those things that you sort of expounded upon before?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I came to Phoenix, I met 2 of the best beat cops in 30 years I've ever met in my entire life, Mike Yatsko and John White. Mike Yatsko was my partner for 7 years. John White is one of my dearest friends. He's now a lieutenant for our department. The 2 of them, they did it the old school way. You get out of your car every day. Everybody knows who you are. When there's a problem, they bring it to you. And when someone has a complaint about you, it is amazing when you work the beat and everybody knows who you are, to have those people come in to defend you when someone says, oh, they're doing this and they're doing that. And someone from the very beat goes, no, that's not what they do. I've seen how they do this. And it's like, have you seen the movie The Highwaymen with Woody Harrelson and Kevin Costner, where they get called out of, they're Texas Rangers. They get called out of retirement to hunt Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh.
It's based on a true story.
Yeah, I did see that.
If we're not careful, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to pull dinosaurs out of retirement, out of the nursing homes, to come back and teach people how to work a beat. We've lost that. We've become radio driven, and we're responsible for the whole city, and that's impossible. If you're not getting out of your car and you're not talking to people, you're not going to be able to solve problems. It's amazing how many crimes my partner and I closed because of his relationship with the community, and then my relationship with them, from him introducing me to them. And then it became, hey, let's go tell Mike and Mike. Let's see if Mike and Mike can get involved. And, people calling you on your weekends saying, hey, that sexual assault that happened, we know who did it. And now you're calling into work going, hey, you guys still looking for somebody out of this? We got word that it's this guy. And, if the detectives couldn't follow up on it, then we would follow up on it. My partner and I closed homicide cases. We closed sexual assault cases. We closed gang shootings because we knew people in the beat, and we took care of the people in our beat. And it's amazing that concept has been lost. If I left my beat, that little 515 beat that I was responsible for, it was for an officer down. It was for something horrible is happening. Other than that, this is my beat. I'm responsible for it. And if I'm not driving around, I'm walking the beat, talking to people. I'm helping them with their groceries. The number of times my partner or John White, Yatsko or White, told someone that wouldn't come out of a house, and they're like, hey, I'm it. I'm the only person my grandmother has. And then to hear those guys do a negotiation with the guy and go, we'll check in on your grandmother. We will take care of your grandmother. You don't want your grandmother to hear that you are dead at the hands of the police. We'll take care of that. And then to see us, we followed up on it. Then you're going and seeing grandma every week while he's locked up. And then every now and then you go up there and you visit him too, and you let him know, hey, we're looking in on grandma. And he goes, I know, grandma tells me all the time that you guys, Mike and Mike, are always there helping out with the groceries. Is there anything she needs? If you give your word, you got to keep it. And it's important to get back to that idea, because we're pulling so far away from it. Everybody's learning about police work from Facebook and from watching videos. And again, looking at that implicit bias idea, see the same video over and over and over and over and over again, and you will believe that there is this massive amount of police violence, when instead it's less than 1% of the time.
Yeah, we are absolutely part of that. I guess you could call it next generation, next culture of officers who really, we didn't have mentors that were like taking us out on the beat and, telling us how important it was to meet the business owners. And, we work downtown, and so it's, that's not really an excuse, because a lot of the old timers, they are they're the original beat cops, and they know everyone. And I really wish that was the mentality. And I have my theories as to why we got so far away from that fundamental way of policing. I mean, part of it is staffing, right? Like, we're getting sent all over the place, and that's kind of chicken egg, right? And also people, I think the culture now is just, the less interaction, and this is not my personal opinion, I think this is just an overarching thing, is that the less interaction you have with the community, the less likely you are to get beefed, or to get into somebody making a complaint about something, or getting into a possible use of force or something. Everything comes down to the less we can interact, the less we might become the problem, And so it's just a shame. Do you have any theories about how we got so far away from that beat cop mentality?
Well, it became, again, we have the same problem here. We're down, I think, 600 police officers. And we have, I think, a quarter of our department can retire right now, including myself, can just walk away, which is incredibly dangerous. Between the radio calls holding, when you get on shift and there's 52 calls holding, they really don't want you walking around and talking to people. They want you answering calls. I get it. Here's the problem, though. If you don't know what you're fighting for, if you don't really understand why you're here, what you're doing it for, then it's for some ideal that doesn't even exist. A lot of people do that. It's the, hey, why do you do this job? Well, I want to protect and serve, blah, 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 blah. And they don't even know what it means. What is it you're willing to fight for? What are you willing to live for? What are you willing to die for? I mean, if you don't have those things in mind when you come to work, it's going to be quite a shock when you may have to put all that on the line. When you work a beat, man, you know what you're fighting for. There's great people in your beat. I worked in a poor beat, and the majority of my beat was illegals. There wasn't a lot of, it was a broad spectrum, but mostly Hispanic in the 515 beat in Phoenix. But everybody there has a story. And when you sit and listen to the story of someone who just like, I just want a better life for my family, man. Well, who doesn't want that? Or you hear someone who goes, you know what? I have to live in this area. So when the gang members are acting up, I don't really want to tell you who did it, but man, I wish you luck in doing it. You got to know what you're fighting for. And then when you go to these scenes and you see, my God, a 5-year-old girl with a bullet wound to her stomach, and you're holding this little girl in your arms, and you know what you're fighting for. And now you know why you want to go out and find the guy who did it. If you don't understand that, then it's just a job. Anybody can do a job. Hell, if that's all it means to you, then why would you put your life on the line? You got to find out what you're fighting for. And if what you're fighting for should matter to you, the people should matter to you. At the time where we think we're at war with the majority of the people in this country, that's when there's really no point to this anymore. And we're not. The majority of the people in the country love the police. If you listen to too much social media, you're going to believe that people hate us. They don't. They really don't. The number of times people thank us all the time. Thank you for your service. After 9/11, holy cow, the number of people who just couldn't help themselves would run into your arms and hug you and cry. And you're like, my God, all they wanted to do was say thank you. And still, even today, my God, I teach at the academy now. I don't have as many interactions, but the number of times coming in and out where someone just comes in and goes, thank you for what you do, man. Thank you for trying to teach them how to do it right. What are you fighting for? That's it. It's the number one question you should ask yourself every day. What the hell am I fighting for?
And you really don't see that unless you get out of your car. I mean, I remember, so where we work over the summer, we were dealing with riots and people just saying the worst things possible. And if you didn't, and really we were there for months and months on end and not really having interaction with our beat because we had to deal with this other stuff. But, when we went back to the beat and actually interacted with the people that I, knew from before, and they were saying, gosh, we've missed you. We need you. We love you, whatever, some variation of that. It hit home in a way that it filled my heart. But if I didn't get out of my car, I was on a bike for a while, so that you don't really have an option there. You're always out. You're not gonna see that part of it. You're just gonna see the part where either social media or the protests and riots where you're just hearing that hate, and that will go back to your implicit bias, like you said, of everybody's just against us. So I think it's super important.
Absolutely. And then when that kicks in and you start to feel that sense of paranoia, like everyone's against you, the brain that is predictive is going to start making those very predictions for you. Everyone is against me. And then you're going to start that. It is amazing when you start learning about the brain, how much your thoughts can drive what's happening in your body, and how when you allow that kind of stress to take you over, you just get sick. And there's the cops who kind of put it in a box for their entire career, and they're dead within 5 years of retirement from everything that they built up over their career. It's very unhealthy to do this job if you really think that we're at war with the people in the communities where we live and breathe.
Yeah. Speaking of mental health, I wanted to touch on something that I believe is in your book, but you discuss dealing with the mentally ill and how the science can work for you in that environment. Can you touch a little bit on that? Because, working downtown, whether the mental illness that we deal with is a result of extended drug use or it's, pre-existing or that kind of thing, it's very rampant. It's a part of a lot of the calls that we go, and it plays a huge role. So can you touch a little bit on that and what you discuss in your book?
Yeah, this is a cause that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I became a cop with the idea of protecting people from evil. I've been involved in numerous lethal force incidents with people who've been trying to either shoot me or my partner or my team, or one who tried to cut my partner's head off. And unfortunately, all of them were mentally ill. When you have to use force on someone and they didn't even know that you were human, it'll affect you a little bit. It's a shame that our mental health system is so broken. When you understand how the brain processes information and that it's predictive, then you have to understand that mental illness is either an error in prediction or correcting that prediction. There's also a region of your brain that kind of checks your body budget. What's happening inside of the body, what's happening outside of the body. And when you over budget, that's when your diabetes, your anxiety issues, depression issues, mental illness issues. If you're using drugs and you're putting a drug into your system, you're changing your body budget. And now you're changing your predictive systems. And that's mental illness is that. What a mentally ill person is seeing isn't a game to them. It's their reality. It's the best expression that their brain can give them while they are under the effects of whatever they're taking or a potential psychotic episode. If you understand that, then you have to understand that some of your key components some of the very things you do to train are training you to do exactly the wrong things when you're dealing with the mentally ill. A mentally ill person will tell you that they have a gun. A mentally ill person may actually put their hand into their pants as if they were drawing a gun. And if the only thing you have is range training of stand your ground, or possibly a firearms instructor who said, there's no choice, you have no choice but to shoot in these circumstances, then you're going to make possibly a horrific mistake. There are some people who can be talked down. There are some people who cannot be talked down. De-escalation is an outcome. It's not really a tactic per se. We do try to de-escalate situations, but de-escalation is either by choice or it's by force. I want to give them the choice, and I don't want to have to use force. And I try to, you want to put yourself into a position where it's harder for them to push the issue. If you understand that, and you understand that people under even, here's the interesting part. If you're under an extreme fight or flight response, you basically predict at the level of autism. So if you understand that, then you better understand that the people you're dealing with are going to be, even if they're not mentally ill and in extreme fight or flight, their predictions are going to be off, and they will do things that don't make sense. And it's very easy for us to say, they must have been suicidal, and you just crap it off. Just another suicide by cop. That's not necessarily correct. They may just have made a really bad prediction. In 30 years, it's amazing how many people at gunpoint go for a cell phone because they want to make a phone call to their babysitter, to their wife, I'm not coming home. And in some cases they get shot. And in other cases, you have a cop going, why, what, who did you need to call while I'm pointing a rifle at you? I just wasn't thinking clear, and I needed to tell my wife I wasn't going to make it home. If you understand how the brain processes information, then you're going to put yourself in the best position to solve these problems. The best position to solve these problems is not standing still. If there's a violation of your expectations and you're not sure what the person's doing, the first thing you should do is move your feet. The idea of how we do range training, where you just stand your ground, that leads to a lot of problems, because people, you're going to revert to habit. Habits are powerful. They're a heuristic in your brain. And if you're building these habits on the range, or you're building bad habits, even in DT, depending on how you train it, they're going to express themselves. And sometimes you use them out of context, and that's what can get us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's huge, is just recognizing it's so hard. And I loved your book for addressing those things. And we actually, Callie and I have been going to the range, and based on reading your book, have changed up completely how we're training. But you do talk about, I don't think it's the word you use, but kind of finding their hooks, finding things that will bring them, snap them back. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's the idea that a lot of cops get caught in a goofy loop. Like you might be talking to somebody who has a gun. It's not pointed at you, because obviously if the gun's pointed at you, there's certain things you have to do. But like mentioned it in the book, there's a guy and we're talking to him. I was replacing a patrol officer who had called for the first SWAT team. I was the first person to get there. I was close by, and I start talking to the guy, and he's not snapping out of it. And the kid, I let him talk for a little bit, but he just kept on the drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. And then finally he goes, hey, Mike, can you take this over for me? So we come in and we start, and the hook is anything that gets that person to come back to reality. A lot of times when the brain is in this fight or flight, or there's mental illness involved, they're going somewhere else. They're not cognitively processing things. So the predictions are, I need to run, I need to fight. My God, I don't have a clue what to do. They may even be in brain lock, 3 different systems in their brain trying to process everything at once. And there's just brain lock, anything that can break them out. So in this case, I noticed a Marine Corps tattoo on the guy's forearm. And that was it. The hook was simple. Oh, you were in the military. And he just, focus changes. Yeah. And he said, I was in the Marine Corps. And I'm like, well, thank you for your service. And then you can see the change. All of a sudden, it's like, well, who are you? Well, my name's Mike, man. I'm with the police department too. And you go, well, you look different than the other guy. Yeah, I'm not a patrol officer. I'm on the SWAT team. They called me just to talk to you, man. What is it? Can I help you? Is there something I can do to help you? Because that's what I'm here for. And then you're talking to him. You're still careful. I'm at cover. I have a rifle. I know how to use it. I don't need to get asked up about this stuff. He's got the gun down. It's pointed. And I understand that action is faster than reaction. So I'm ready, but I'm hanging back behind cover. I can suck up to cover if I need to, and I can still solve the problem. But this idea of of trying to multitask and I can hold a conversation and I'm also going to be able to do everything else. What I'm doing is trying to find a hook, and I am also trying to make sure that I buy as much time as possible for my team to get there, because as soon as my team is there, now somebody else is going to do the gun work if it needs to be gun work, and I'm going to do the talking, or someone who is way better at or is more what's the word I'm looking for, has more practice. I kind of use I've been to negotiator school, but I kind of use I'm looking for hooks, and negotiators have a whole nother way of doing it. I would prefer to just be I would prefer not to be that negotiator guy. It's a heavy responsibility. It's exhausting trying to break someone out of that. But that's it. For me, it's that idea of finding a hook. Now, they're going to use a slightly different way of putting it, but that's technically what you're looking to do. The idea of one thing that gets them to start a higher level of processing. So it's not happening in those more limbic structures. It's not a basic prediction of the brain. Now there's some more complex reasoning behind it. And there's this idea, once you get the cortex involved, the higher levels of the cortex, the further it goes in the front of the cortex, the more layers are going to be added to the reasoning. And as soon as you find something where you can start talking to them a little bit and they start answering questions, if they're not even answering questions at first, they're gone, man. That's where you really need time, and you need to really, they're burning up a tremendous amount of energy. That's where you really, if you can do it safely, you need to wait it out, because there is going to be a point where they get exhausted, and then some hook will catch them. And when it does, you'll see it. It's a complete change in their demeanor from, I don't know who you are, to why are you here? And it's pretty amazing when you're there for 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and then all of a sudden you get a hook in and the person starts talking to you and they're like, why didn't you just say that before? And you're like, well, I've been here 2 hours, buddy. And he's like, you have? And I'm like, yeah, 2 hours, bud. And it's amazing to see. It's just, the more and more we know about the brain, the more and more we know it involves everything. Everything you talk about in law enforcement involves what's going on in that 6 inches of real estate that is between your ears. Talk about wellness, talk about implicit bias, talk about working a beat, talk about being better under stress, talk about the mentally ill. It all comes down to how the brain processes information and how we can be better at processing our own, so we can figure out what's going on in someone else's.
That's so fascinating. So much of what you're saying brings me back to moments that I've had on certain calls where I realized that someone actually can be drawn out. And there are some people, I think you mentioned earlier, that you just can't get that hook in, you can't get that leverage. And I feel like that is often exacerbated by drug use. But it takes me back to even when I was on rotation, Lexi, I don't think I ever told you, but this was on one of my rotations. I responded to a guy who was in a hotel room, and he was basically covered in his own feces. He wouldn't leave the hotel, and he was completely naked in his hotel room. So we had to go in there. And of course, I was a student at the time. So they were like, all right, Hinsman, this is all you. So we force the entry and we go in there, and he's naked, covered it all head to toe in his own feces all over the wall. So we wrestle him to the ground. We get him handcuffed, and, he is just yelling at the top of his lungs, like nonsensical stuff. And then out of nowhere, probably about 30 minutes, we're waiting for, the ambulance to come. And about 30 minutes into it, his yelling, he just stops all of a sudden. He looks at me, he looks up at me, and he says, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "You're sorry?" I was shocked that he was even making sense at this time. And he said, "Yeah, I just farted." and I just thought to myself, well, it's okay. Like thinking to myself, that is the least of your concerns right now, my friend. You are naked and covered in feces. But, it's just like, it was one of those moments where you just think this person is having an episode clearly. And yet the most personal thing that happened to him was that he passed gas in front of a bunch of officers, and it brought him back to reality. And from that point on, we were able to kind of have a discussion. And so, you learn certain things, I think, from certain calls as you go on. And that's the thing about you, is that you've amassed so much knowledge, and that's how you have been able to provide this tool, this book, and this understanding of neuroscience, that yeah, you actually can gain some leverage and you can dig in and find a hook with some of these folks before it reaches that point where you create exigency, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's just incredible. I mean, I don't know, Lexi, did you have a burning question or anything?
Well, I mean, you just touched on something is that reading your book, was thinking a lot about, is that, who's creating that exigency? Are we creating it? Is the suspect creating it? And how, more and more we are really looked at, under a microscope, and it's important for us to not create the exigent circumstance. Maybe talk a little bit about that, about how you frame that in your book and how that's important for law enforcement.
Yeah, the number one thing you have to consider, and this is what I currently teach to the recruits. The first question you should always ask yourself: why am I here? What is this going to look like when I'm done? Because if you don't begin with the end in mind, then you're going to start use this hodgepodge thinking. That's where you get driven by abstract thoughts. If you don't give the brain something to do, it's going to wander on you. So the idea is, why am I here? Do I have lawful authority and purpose? If I have lawful authority and purpose, then now I can direct this scene. If I don't have lawful authority and purpose, then what is it I'm trying to accomplish? And when am I ready to walk away? Because I don't want to push an issue where I don't have lawful authority and purpose and have it turn into a use of force incident. That's not going to look good, because why were you there in the first place? And it's unfortunate that a lot of cops don't think that way. And it's taught a lot in tactical schools. It's not necessarily taught at the academy level. And that's a shame, because that idea of tactical thinking, why am I here? What's it look like when I'm done? And how am I going to get there? What's my A plan? What's my B plan? And what's my emergency plan? If you don't already have those ideas in your head, if you're not already running those ideas into your head, instead you're focused on your problems at home, problems with a relationship, problems with bills, you're not going to be predicting. You're going to be reacting. And that's that mistake that a lot of people make with training. They always want to do the reacting training. It's a hell of a lot better to do the predicting training. If you are running these ABC plans, your working memory is online. When your working memory is online, you are connecting different portions of your brain. Your short-term memory is using this idea of, I'm going to formulate these plans. Now there's a connection, there's a bridge between your short-term and your long-term memory. And now far-flung areas of your brain are running these prediction loops, and ideas are going to come out of the blue, some of them good, some of them bad. And you're going to have the chance through all of this to figure out, do I recognize when this is going south on me, when things aren't going my way? Am I ready to adjust my plan? The biggest one, though, is who's driving the exigency here? Is the exigency the circumstance? Is it what the suspect is doing? Or is it what I'm doing? Because if it's what I'm doing, that's a whole different story. If the suspect is driving the exigency, then you're going to have a little bit more leeway in what you do, because people are going to go, well, he was trying to save a child, for God's sakes, as opposed to the officer stood in front of the car, dared the guy not to run him over, and then shot the driver when the driver tried to run him over. That is exigency created by the officer. That is not exigency created by the situation. In the past, judges have been more forgiving with the idea of officers creating the exigency, and you still shouldn't try to kill a cop. That is changing a lot, where they're looking at that 2-3 minutes prior and they're saying, why would you put yourself in this situation? And why would you allow a situation develop the way it did, where you could make a mistake as horrific as the one you made? Those are your three key things. Why am I here? What's it look like when I'm done? Is there exigency? And if there is exigency, is the exigency created by the suspect and the situation, or is it created by me? And if it's created by me, we've got a problem. We got to fix this.
Write that down.
I love it.
That's so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's super simple, and I feel like in a very, very roundabout way, we are educated, about decision making and that kind of thing in the academy, but not with the background of science, not with the understanding that it's something that you can train your brain to sort of develop and become more effective in doing so. And I want to touch on the study that you're doing. Is it a study? I think it is a research study that you're doing with Leslie Sherlin. Is that
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that whole project's about?
Yeah, we're studying the effects of brain training to see if it improves performance. And what we're looking for right now is, does it make a better student in the academy? How do they do failure rate on tests, on shooting, on decision making, and then so what they have is, it's called the Versus system, and a lot of athletes use it. Some special forces people had used it, and there's a book called The Rise of Superman, which is
Oh
about
yeah.
peak performance athletes and how they're training. And I was reading that book, and they mentioned Dr. Leslie Sherlin in that book. So I looked him up on the internet and saw that he had a 480 prefix, which means he's from right down the road here. I called him, and he was willing to replicate a study he did for the military, and it was on peak performance and training. The Versus system, you play a series of video games while wearing an EEG headset, and your brain is the joystick. So if the correct portions of your brain are firing, you're going to get there's a couple of games you play. There's a neuro racer, there's a balloon that you float, there's a golf game, and you're playing a series of games, but the joystick is your brain. If the correct portion of your brain is firing, and there's different parameters based on a neuro assessment that you take, and then 2 times a week for 23 sessions, you're going to train these neuro games, and then we're going to do a final assessment. And he now has 5,000 peak performance brains in a database. And the entire time, your performance is compared to this peak performance database in 6 parameters. In peak performance, there's a lot of esoterics. There's things that work for me that won't work for you, that work for you that won't work for me. But it was these 6 parameters that were consistently found in everyone. And that's the idea behind, let's train the ones where we know it's consistent across the board. And then people are going to find their esoterics as they go. So that's the idea behind the study. We're in the final phase of it. We're in the very COVID kind of messed us up a little bit, and we were supposed to be done, but thanks to the doctor's patience and the fact that we still do have people coming into the academy. Our final control group and our final test group start next week, and then hopefully by June we will have the tabulated results, and then the doc is going to end up publishing a study on the effects of this training on making a better cop.
So, I mean, are you going to make $1 million doing some sort of training program for him? I mean, what's the end game for that? Because that sounds like big money.
Well, obviously the Versus system is doing very well. There's a lot of Olympic athletes, professional football players who use it, and a lot of the athletes now purchase it for themselves. They use it. They don't need me. They don't need little old me or the law enforcement market. And there's other things that we do. The big thing is, I tell people, and there's nothing nefarious about it. I mean, law enforcement training hasn't changed a lot. We add new tools, but people like to build a catalog, and they like to say, here's your 12 DT techniques that everybody has to know. Here's how the law works. And, here's how I like in the academy. The academy is, we're teaching you, let's say it's baseball. We're going to teach you the theory of baseball. We're going to teach you the rules of baseball. We're going to show you how to field a ball. We're going to show you how to hit a ball 60 miles an hour right over the plate. And when you graduate, we're going to throw you in the major leagues. Good luck to you. And hopefully in 7 years, you'll still be in the league and know how to do this stuff. And then you show up at the major league level, and the ball's coming 90 miles an hour, and it isn't coming straight over the plate. And every now and then that pitcher throws one right at your head. And if you're not ready for it, it's going to be a rough day at the office. There's a big difference between the theory of how you do something and the application of how you do something. We are very good at the theory of, the law of, the rules and regulations of. We are not very good at the application of. And in the past, it's because we didn't know any better. Now, as more and more science is being found, we're finding out that there are much better ways of doing this, but someone's going to have to be willing to put in the time, the energy, and it is also going to mean that we're going to start treating police officers more like athletes and less like the idea of anyone can do this job. Anyone can do 99% of this job, but it takes special people to do the 1%. And that's where I think we need to do a better job of explaining to people that 1% can be It can be horrific at times, and there's a cost. And if you don't understand that, then it's a shame to have someone come back and go, you never told me it was this crazy. You never told me that a week out of the academy I could be in a shooting, that
Hmm.
2 weeks out of the academy I could be holding an officer's brains in my lap, and this has happened. To have someone come back and go, I never thought, I thought I'd be protected. 2 weeks out of the academy, I'm holding an officer's brains in my lap. I never thought that could happen. 3 weeks out of the academy, I never thought I could be ambushed. There's all these stories that come back. And then you realize, well, we're failing these kids. These kids are coming in with this ideal they're going to change the world, and they're going to find out that the world also changes them. And there's a lot of work involved here that we're not doing, and we could be doing. It's just going to take the right people in the right places now to spread the message that there is a better way of doing this.
So what would you say your top three things for agencies, once they get those kids out of the academy and they're training them, what would you say sort of your top three, I guess, advice would be to develop better officers in the training that they're doing?
Number one, anything that involves a classroom should be done at a community college, and it should be an associate's degree spent over a year. Learn everything there is to know about the theory of this job, learn everything there is to know about the law, have the physical fitness requirements, already be training them, teach them about personal discipline, teach them health, teach them diet, teach them wellness, have all of that done by the time you get your associate's degree. When you start that academy, that is 26 weeks of immersion as a police officer in a controlled environment. We're going to show you active shooter. We're going to show you scenes. We're going to show you how to respond to a call. You should not get into a car with a training officer and have a training officer wonder whether or not you know what a domestic violence call looks like when all you've ever heard is the theory of one. Or, God forbid, you're going to an active shooter and the only thing you've had is a couple of dry runs moving through a sterile environment without understanding how horrific it could be. If you don't understand how horrible it can be to see dead, mangled children, if you don't understand how horrible it can be to see an officer down and know that you can't do anything for him right now, you've got work to do in front of you, it's going to be overwhelming. And it doesn't have to be, because if you are in an immersion environment, you can decide in that immersion environment whether this is the job for you. And unfortunately, there's going to be some there's always the risk that in training that you can get PTSD. There's a risk that something can happen to you in training that you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do this, but this has been my lifelong dream, but God, I don't think I want this anymore. And now there's that confusion in the brain of what do I want to do right now, where they didn't tell me this was going to happen. That shouldn't happen. It should be a full immersion environment. When you get in that car the first day on your FTO, you should know how the car works. You should know how the computer works. And when that first call comes out, it should be that idea of, I'm excited, I'm a little nervous, but I know what this is going to look like. And I can trust the person who's sitting next to me. They're not going to throw me to the wolves. I'm going to be okay here. It shouldn't be a surprise. And right now we're real good at the theory. We're not real good at the application. That's the thing that has to be corrected. And you look across, I've looked across the country at the different training programs, and they're very good at a huge manual that is good maybe as a self-defense tool and horrible as a learning tool. You can have an adult learning environment. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not teaching discipline, if you're not teaching people how things can go wrong for them, and that if you're not in shape, if you don't train, if close quarter crisis scares you, you're going to have a rough time on this job. If you're afraid to put your hands on a human being who needs you to put their hands on them to get control, we've got a problem. And the majority of police officers, man, they don't like close quarters. They don't want to do it. You don't have to like it, but you better get comfortable with the idea that you're going to be involved in these situations over the course of a career. It's going to be a short career. That would be the immersion to know what it's going to be like and to be tested. And a good example is the Vietnam War. Before the Vietnam War, or as the war started, we were losing one airplane for every 3 that we shot down. They started the Top Gun School, and the Top Gun School started this aerial to aerial combat. We used these camera systems, and you were getting into aerial dogfights. And then you were going down, reviewing the footage, and you were learning how to be better at aerial gunfights. By the time you graduated that school, they found that you had a greater than 80% chance of winning your first true gunfight. And if you won your first true gunfight aerial to aerial combat, you then had a 90% chance of winning the next one. And it just kept going up and up and up and up. I would rather have the odds 90% better in my favor than 50-50, which are most of the shootings that we're getting into. And that can be with prediction, correct prediction, with the idea of keeping the brain online and working your strategies out and actually using the 6 inches of real estate between your ears. You can tilt the odds in your favor. If this is going to go bad, I know where I'm going to go. I know what I'm going to do. And if I have to do something horrific, I know that I can live with that as long as I did the right thing for the right reason at the right time.
Does that answer your question, Lexi?
Oh, yeah. So how do we convince the people in charge?
Right now, it's going to take the idea that it's not just about money. And I understand, don't get me wrong, when a city runs its operations, I get it. Everything's about, it's business. I get it. But the idea of cost effectiveness, until the lawsuits cost us more, then we're just going to put out more memos, more emergency notifications, and more memos that tell you what the rules are, but don't train you how to apply those rules into a realistic environment. Either you want to correct the problem, or you want to play lip service to the problem for political gain. That's kind of the what you see right now. And again, I don't fault people. I understand what it is. I understand that a city entity is a business. I get it. I've never gone to work thinking that my city loved me, that oh my God, they can't live without me. I'm not that naive. I get it. But there comes a point where, and I think this current political environment is perfect for it. What do you want? Because if you want a better cop, we can make a better cop. But are you willing to put in the time, and are you willing to put in the money? If you're not willing to put in the time and the money, then it's crazy to expect you're going to get any different results. And I'm not going to lie, the reason I would like to make a better cop is I want to see more cops come home. I'm tired of hearing of cops dying every other day. And I'm tired of hearing or seeing performance where you're like, man, that can be fixed. I don't fault this person. And it's so easy to look at a police use of force, and it's so easy to just throw out the word racist. It's so easy to throw out the word, he's just a terrible person, because in your mind, you can't figure out how that could happen. Most people who watch police use of force, and even now you're talking like your city entities and stuff, when they look at a police use of force, it's like you're watching football on a Sunday. And you're watching it, and your favorite team just made a mistake, and you go, oh my God, I could have caught that pass. Really? Because if you could catch that pass, how come you're making $20 an hour instead of $22 million a year? It's not that easy to do it when the pressure is on, because stress is what we do to ourselves. Pressure is what the situation asks from us. You're in the Super Bowl and there's 80,000 fans in the stand, 2.5 million people watching around the world. There's a little bit of pressure on you. And so, yeah, he dropped a pass. The amazing thing is the same system that is running a baseball player, a batter at the plate, the same procedural memory system, the same idea of there's not time, it's compressed time, and I have to make accurate decisions. You only have to be right 3 out of 10 times, and you're going to the Hall of Fame in baseball, and you're making $20 million a year. You have shaving commercials, beautiful cars. Life is good for you. If a cop makes 3 out of 10 correct decisions, he's either dead or in jail. But it's the same processes that are driving it. So we let the guy make $21 million and forgive him for only being right 3 out of 10 times. Yet we're jumping on a cop's back for being wrong 1 time in the same compressed timeframes. In baseball, nobody's dying. Nobody's risking dying. So imagine the pressure when you show up somewhere at a domestic violence call when nobody's brains are predicting accurately. Nobody's brains are predicting correctly. And one of the examples I give, especially when I'm talking to the community, is have you ever been in a fight, a verbal argument with someone that you love and said something so vile and nasty that afterwards you went, oh my God, what was I thinking? And how long am I going to sleep on the couch now? That is your not thinking brain thinking it's a fight. The best prediction is it's a fight. Let's get this over with. So boom, here we go. Let's let it rip, tater chip. And here it comes. And now here comes the results. Whoops, bad prediction. And here's the prediction error. I'm on the couch right now. It's not that easy to do it under extreme pressure in compressed timeframes. It can be trained to be better, but it's never going to be perfect. And if you're looking for perfect, then why do you accept 3 out of 10 and are more than happy to see them making $20 million a year? When it's so easy to watch, there's a part of your brain that can fantasize, that can run these John Wick ideas, because you can fantasize. It's a wonderful thing about the brain. You can project yourself into the future. In your head, you can run these ideas of all these things you can do. You can watch a movie like John Wick and you can picture yourself doing it. Horrible idea, by the way, because you're going to die trying to play that game. But the average person does the same thing, and they try to do what would I do in this situation, even though they don't have any of the procedural memory for doing it. It doesn't matter. It's very easy to say, this is what I would do. Cops shouldn't do it under any circumstances. It shouldn't be a, this is what I would do. It's a, this is where can we learn from this, and what can we do pushing forward if we don't think that that's a good idea? That's kind of how you have to look at it. But the average person looking at it, their brain is running predictions, and those predictions are, fill a room with 100 people and you tell those 100 people that 90% of people can't drive for shit, and 90 of those people are going to tell you they're part of the 10, guaranteed. And the 10 people who say they're horrible drivers probably have image issues or depression, anxiety issues. That's how you're going to find out who they are in a room. The brain has a funny way of telling itself a story. And the story is usually, I'm good enough, I'm fast enough, I'm strong enough, until the pressure comes. And then when the pressure comes, you sometimes get the reverse loop. Holy cow, I'm not good enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not strong enough. That can be trained, but you have to be willing to put in the time. And there's 2 roads to this. Number 1, the agency has to be willing to do it. 3 roads. 2, your city entity has to be willing to put in the time and the money. And then you need officers on board, because the best way to learn is when your attention is directed, focused, and you want in on this. That's why so much police training fails, because most cops don't want to go there. They don't want to hear it, or they don't want to look like a fool in front of their fellow officers. So they're already having issues with the idea of training in front of other people. And if you can't get them on board, then you've lost them. It's kind of a checkbox. Hey, there's 4 hours of training, write down that they had it. But training inadequate to the task is the number 1 driver we're going to see in the future, is more and more officers saying, I was inadequately trained for this task. And there are Supreme Court cases saying that you better be accurately trained, correctly trained for the tasks that you're driven to.
Mike, I'm gonna ask you, kind of push back a little bit on the, you said you need your city on board, you need your department on board to start like prioritizing this kind of training, and then you need the officers on board. Just for devil's advocate, I'm going to say, what if we don't have 2 of those 3? I want officers to walk away with feeling like, and I think that you would agree, like even the individual can empower themselves to take away from your book and from a lot of the concepts that you've been talking about today, to really start to employ them within their own training. I mean, that is possible, right? And do you have recommendations for, like, Lexi and I, like we are 2 cops with 5 years on basically. And, we're rookies, we're trying to get better. And we don't have necessarily a situation, both in terms of the city and department priorities, that are in line with our priorities for training. So how do we overcome that and employ some of the concepts that you've been talking about? I mean, Lexi referenced how we've been inspired to change up the way we're training at the range based on more realistic moving and shooting situations. So what are some other applications of that the individual who watches this can step away regardless of the support and say, fuck that, I'm still going to go 100 miles an hour and try to improve myself?
Yeah. So I probably should have put that a little bit better. So there's the 3 branches, and we should, and I do. I'm 54 years old. I've been on the job 30 years. I train every day. I dry fire my gun every day. I train some form of defensive tactics every day, applicable to the job, not just sport. I'm doing something every single day. I'm going to make sure that I set the best example for the people I teach. I'm not going to come in out of shape. I'm not going to come in unprepared. And I'm one of the instructors who says, if you want to call bullshit on me, please call bullshit on me. Please do it. Please. Because I will give you the opportunity to prove me wrong. I love it. I absolutely love it. I don't get mad at it. I don't care when a young wrestler says, well, I'll just use wrestling on you. Come use wrestling on me. I've been doing this a long time. I know a lot of tricks. Let's get to it. But there's the idea. So if the city isn't going to give you the time to do it on duty, if they're not going to give you the resources to set aside the time to let you do it, then the number 1 driver is going to be you. You're it. You are the number one person, and that's where it's unfortunate, but that becomes the hired gun mentality. So I am a hired gun. You would then be a hired gun. I can take my business elsewhere. I don't have to show my loyalty to one place. I will go to some place, any place, or I can choose to stay. But the number one driver of me is me. And I've always looked at it that way first. But if you want to change so my idea is, if you want to change the environment, the total environment, and put out a better product, then you are going to need the time, the space, the money. Every single officer should be putting in the personal initiative. The number one driver we have now is here, and here's another problem. And again, it's not bad. You can go anywhere to start learning a skill set. But let's use. So I love every martial art there is. I've learned from all of them. My preference, well, not preference, but what I came in as is a kickboxer with a heavy emphasis on boxing. So that would be my core. Everything is built off of that. I have a very knowledgeable understanding of the ground. I train it all the time. But my core, if I had my druthers and there's going to be a fight anyway, I'd rather be standing for it. You can choose any system as your core system, but if you don't put it into context, context is the problem. So when you're training by yourself, you have to be sure that you or anybody you grab onto that's trying to help you can put it into context for you. A prime example would be, so let's say your city says that a choke can only be used at lethal force. And that's what most of them are now, because we don't have the doctors on board as much as we used to. If it were my opinion, I would say we should put a lot more people in the carotid control technique in order to avoid excited delirium, understanding the risk that it could still be caused. But doctors have now gotten to the point where they're saying the carotid control technique is safe when it's used on healthy people. We will not offer an opinion on when it's used on a non-healthy person. And we don't deal with a lot of healthy people on an average daily basis in law enforcement. So let's say you spend 3 days a week training jits, and jits is awesome. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people get mad at me because I'll use an example and they'll go, he hates jujitsu. I love jujitsu, love it. But if you spend 3 days a week training chokes and habits are built up in the brain, heuristics are used, the brain predicts, and someone tries to use a sloppy takedown on you in the street and you throw a guillotine choke on them, and you're filmed on camera doing it, you're probably going to get indicted for aggravated assault based on your city's policies. If you don't put your training into context, the context is going to lose itself when it's reality. If you spend the majority of your time standing still on that range and trying to outshoot someone who's already pointing a gun at you, it still doesn't make sense to me. A qual. The target turns, it's already presenting a threat. You're going to stand your ground and try to shoot someone who's already pointing a gun at you. And it's usually a darkened silhouette that doesn't even have a weapon that we're shooting at. None of this makes sense. None of it. If you don't put it into context for yourself, then somebody else's training can draw you down a line that you end up responsible for. And that's the sad part. I hate to see something where an officer does something that I know is being trained, but then someone wants to blame him for the training, and then someone else wants to just say, oh, well, he did it wrong. And it's so easy to throw that out. That's the easiest one to throw out. Oh, he just did it wrong. That's why it went wrong. That's the problem, context. So when you want to train on your own, as long as there's someone who can help you out with that context, that's the important part. That's the driver. DT is extremely important, but if you're violating your own policies while you're training, you better have this 80-20 rule in mind to all training. And that's my suggestion. There's 20% inputs that are going to give you 80% of your outputs. You can find that in defensive tactics. You can find that in shooting. You can find that in every aspect of damn near everything involving anything that involves learning. If you identify those 20% things that give you your 80% outputs, then 80% of your training time should be spent on those 20% inputs. The 20% is spent on the others. So if you want to use a sport emphasis, and that's fine, you just have to devote some 20% of your time to the idea of now context for the job. You may be very comfortable working from your back. You don't want to be on your back in the street. So you may want to focus in your sport on getting off your back, putting yourself into a position to control the mayhem. Because if you're doing groundwork, but you're not training strikes, man, it's a whole different world when someone 50 pounds heavier is raining elbows and fists down on top of you. So it's context. That's it. Same thing. If you want to do competition shooting, I once was teaching overseas, and the guy was a phenomenal competition shooter. but he was making the mistake of saying he was ready for his first gunfight because of the style of training he was doing. So the next day we set him up for it. I'm like, there you go. Here are, you did it. You shot 12 pieces of steel in 3 point something seconds or 4 something seconds. That's awesome. I'm going to cut that in half. Here are 6 people. You are free to respond as soon as the first person makes a move. And now do your magic. John Wick this thing. Show me what you can do. And he got pincushioned pretty darn quick off the first movement because he has to react off that first movement. You have to decide. You can shoot the gun faster than you can think. And if you don't understand that you can shoot that gun way faster than you can think, then you are setting yourself up for trouble if you use the timer to be the only driver of what you do. And that's what brings the competition shooters to say, he's such an asshole. He hates competition. I love competition. But again, it's the competition, the context.
Yes.
If you're not putting it in context, there's a problem. That's it. And people get very upset about that, but man, it's the truth. And I got the neuroscience to support it.
Well, the people that get butthurt about it are the ones that are only good at that one thing, that are that specialized competition or specialized where they can perform a skill in a vacuum, right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
And you said just so many things that I want to comment on, but I was recently listening to a podcast where I don't know if you've heard of Coleman Hughes, but he was interviewing a cop and a retired cop, and he was telling a story about how he was with his partner and they were talking to a suspect, and somebody came up behind his partner and grabbed his gun, and he drew, and in the moment he drew, his finger was on the trigger, he looked at the guy's eyes, and the guy's eyes just went, and it turned out to be his partner's friend who pulled that gun out, but something in that guy's eyes was able to contextualize it for him and made him not pull that trigger. And I just can imagine that there's so much brain science in that of what he saw, and he would have been perfectly justified in shooting this guy, but he would have had to live with that for a long time, right? For the rest of his life. But that reminds me of what you're talking about, but also just, I love I've never thought about it that way of like a hired gun. And we see that so much now as people are so ready to leave a department for greener pastures. And that's probably, you're right, going back to that, like, well, we're taking it upon ourselves to train ourselves. We're taking it upon ourselves to be better cops. I can do that anywhere. I can even take a pay cut and do that somewhere where I feel a little bit more supported. So why don't the departments take it on themselves and the politicians to make it an environment where, no, you're not a hired gun. You actually are getting the training. You're getting all this stuff that makes you our officer.
And the officer that is going to be able to provide the best service possible to its community, make the best decisions possible. And in the end, if you want to talk dollars and cents, who are paying out victims and victims' families a lot less. It's like, if you really want to make it about cash, you can. But that's the long con version, right? Like, they can only see their hand in front of their face when it comes to making decisions financially for the city, or what's in vogue in terms of politics. So
not to mention how much it costs to train somebody and then just see them walk away.
Yeah, clearly Lexi and we're just right now we're having a therapy session based on our own department. I apologize for that, Mike.
No, you're fine. They're all going through it. I mean, every department's going through that right now. And I can see from their perspective a little bit. A lot of people who don't understand the job believe that if we make you too efficient, that, oh my God, we're training more efficient killers. When people heard we were doing the neuroscience study, oh my God, the number of reporters who wanted to say, the only reason you're doing this is because you guys were in so many shootings last year. No, we've been in the process of setting this up for multiple years. Please stop saying that. We are not trying to make more efficient killers. What we're trying to do is make a better cop. And here's the thing. If when the action is breaking, that cop is confident, if that cop knows that he can be quiet, confident, or she can be quiet, confident, is predicting correctly, then you're going to have the best performing officer. You're going to have less mistakes. You're not going to have an officer caught on camera doing stupid stuff, saying stupid stuff, because what you really realize is that when you're in that verbal banter, if you're motherfucking each other back and forth, your brain is being headed down a mispredicting path, just like theirs is. They think more efficient is bad, and what they don't understand is more efficient is good. The number of fights that I have not had to get into by simply talking to people and going, and not necessarily being an ass, but just looking at them and going, hey, listen, man, if you really are looking for a physical altercation, technically speaking, I'm your guy. You're going to get it. But do you really want that? I mean, what is it we're talking about here? Because you're looking at a night in jail at the most. But if we're going to scuffle, you're going to be in jail for 3-4 years. Well, probably not, because, you know, the judges like you a lot, but it's all right. You'll be out. It's going to take you more than a night. Let's put it that way. And let's put it this way. I'm also pretty good at this stuff, and no offense, but a lot of people are talking UFC, but they look like KFC, and they're talking a little tough. And you're like, you might not want to head down this road. I'm just warning you. And most people will go, oh yeah, you know what, yeah, that might be right. And next thing you know, you got a guy that gets in the car. And one of the best ones I've ever heard is an officer who wasn't necessarily a great fighter, but man, could he talk. And one day he's just talking to the guy and he goes, man, my boss he's on me about fights, scuffles. I'm on my third uniform of the week. Man, is there anything I can say or do to get you to get in the car right now? As I just go get something to eat. Hell, if you'll get in the car right now, I'll get you a burger on the way to jail. And sure as hell, this guy goes, you get me a burger? He goes, I'll stop at a drive-through. We'll stop. I'll have a cop watch you. We'll cuff you to the front. You can eat your burger and I'll take you to jail. The guy goes, you got a deal. And he gets in the car. Never saw anything like it. That cop could talk. It makes a better cop when you're more confident, when you can fight and you know you can fight, when you can work the gun and think with the gun in your hand. There's plenty of people who can work the gun, but there's not a lot of people who can think with a gun in their hand. I liken it to, there's a lot of houses in the United States that have guitars in them. That doesn't mean the people are guitar players. My son once asked me, aren't you worried in Arizona about all the people that have guns? I go, nah, plenty of people have guitars. That don't make them guitar players. Plenty of people have guns. That don't make them gunfighters. A lot of people can play a single note, a couple of chords. Some people can play a riff from their favorite song. You want to be good at something, you need to write your own music. That's the key to this. That is the key to all training. You want to write your own music. You want to dance to your own tune. You don't dance to somebody else's.
Ooh, I love that.
That is excellent. Lexi, do you have any other like burning questions? Because I know we're running on like over an hour now, which is,
I mean, my nerd notes in my book, I could go on and on and on. I think that the work that you're doing is so important. And I think that there's so many avenues. I really agree with you. Like departments, politicians, they need to get on board with this because, you know, we're fielding officers that have, you know, 2 hours a year of training, 4 hours a year of training in DT. Would you field a football team that had that? You know, it's just, we have to be able to figure out a way to get them on board with this. And I see what you're doing with your book and the science as a really good avenue for that. And I really just encourage anybody, I've been encouraging people to buy your book. I've bought it for people. I just think that, thank you for talking to us. And I mean, I think we could probably go on 4 more hours and touch everything, but you know, I think this is a good base.
Yeah. And please, when you conclude your research, please forward that article to us or the findings. I'd love to just look over it and pass it on up the chain and hopefully turn some heads. Cause Lexi and I were just like, well, I mean, Lexi probably doesn't refer to herself as like a peon, but I feel like, you know, we're just a couple rookies and we're doing the best we can to kind of make a bit of a culture change. And a lot of what you've discussed today is extremely, extremely inspiring. So genuinely, thank you so much for speaking with passion to us. It is so invigorating. This is why Lexi and I do it, is because it's like, it makes it that much easier to go forth in such a already difficult occupation. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. And here, brains are meant to be socialized. We're meant to bounce off of each other. So that's the key driver of all this. You guys are doing an amazing job. The idea is exactly that. The more people you talk to, the more ideas you get from training, the more you want to make a difference, the more you have the opportunity to make a difference. As soon as you stop and say it's impossible, this job sucks, there's nothing good that can happen, we're done, nobody likes us, then what's the point, man? There's plenty of other jobs out there. What is the point? So on that line, man, if there's anything I can do, anything, you've got anytime, you call me anytime, you send me an email anytime, text me, call me 24/7. I'm there. Anytime you want to talk, man, I'm in. I love this stuff.
Well, we appreciate it. And just beware, we may take you up on it one day.
Absolutely will. We absolutely will.